Okay, I am live. So yeah, what's up? This is live. It's kind of early in the morning, but I'm an early riser due to the fact that, well, uh, I got young children. They got up early. I mean, it's a long story. I guess we don't need to get into all that, but this is an AMA, clearly, whatever. So we are chilling. It's somewhat early in the morning, like I said. I wonder if anybody else is even around. I guess people in Europe sometimes tune in around this time. See, someone just said, greetings from Manila. Uh-huh. The world teacher. It's 5 a.m. Well, it's always 5 a.m. somewhere. AL. You haven't gotten to sleep. You don't have kids. Yeah, exactly. So I do have kids. I guess I can remember a time when I used to go to bed late. But I also have worked night shifts. Used to have to go to work at 5 in the morning, et cetera, et cetera. So I've had various schedules. I can get used to anything, man. Anyway, so I don't really have a plan. I've never done one of these like live sessions before. So I just figured I would give it a try and see what people are up to. So what are you guys up to? It's coffee. I got to get a new mug at some point. I guess I should have thought about what I was going to do before I came on here, but I really didn't. So you guys want to know some personal information about me? Well, I guess yeah, you're gonna find out. You don't have any intelligent questions. You don't have to have intelligent questions. Oh, thank you. You enjoy the interviews. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Oh, wow. I asked the right questions. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a lot of work doing those interviews, actually. And those ads that are on the videos, which are super annoying, I know, pay for the hosting space that I pay for to keep the audio files. Greetings from Chile. Hello. Carlos. All right. Welcome. Yeah. Anyway, so that's why some people complain about the ads on the YouTube videos, and I can see why. I don't really watch them, but so I don't know how many ads or what it looks like. But when I watch videos on YouTube, I could understand that's annoying. But in my defense, what I've always said is that money, like, I don't live off that money. I have a regular job. I teach for a living, do philosophy, etc. But that I do pay out of pocket to host those audio files so I can podcast it. And that's what the ads pay for. Someone told me that I could actually do this free. And I looked into the audio, like this hosting service for podcasting. What was it called? I forget now. I don't know. There's a few of them, but I don't know if that's really, am I paranoid? But I don't really want to put my audio files on a free server because I feel like maybe then they'll do things. I don't know. So I'm old, guys. I don't trust these cloud services. But anyway, so does anyone have any? You don't have to have an intelligent question, by the way. There's no, you know what I always tell my students, actually, what I always tell them is that there are no dumb questions except the ones that you want to ask but don't. That's what I always say. So anyway, one thing that I've been doing, I don't know how much you guys know about me or how much you care about knowing about me, but 30 years ago, I was into skateboarding. And when I was, I guess for one of my teenage years into my early 20s, I skateboarded a lot. I was never very good, honestly. I always wanted to skate ramps, but I mostly skated streets, curbs, canals, irrigation ditches and shit like that, stuff like that. Mayor lords, I can't be talking like that. But anyway, so I quit skating like 30 years ago. I was thinking about this the other day. So I think it was probably 1991. That was the last time I was on a skateboard. And the reason I quit skating mostly was because I just hurt myself a lot. And I never really hurt myself, but I would tweak my ankle or sprain my wrist or jam a toe or thumb or whatever. And I was also learning how to play the drums. And it just got in the way because I'd hurt myself and I would say, oh, gee, I can't play, guys. My ankle hurt. I can't even hit the bass drum. So I kind of gradually stopped skating because I was getting more into drumming. And if you've seen my channel, you've probably seen my lame attempts at music. Drumming is another area where I was never really good, but I just enjoy, I have this issue where whenever I see someone do something well, I want to do it too, like that. But anyway, so my son, who's now 6 years old, was asking me about skating the other day, or like a couple months ago, actually. And I was telling him, oh, in the old days, I used to skate. And he's like, yeah, right. And I was like, no, really? So I got a skateboard to show him. And of course, I fell off and hurt my hand, and then I got pads. And now I've been skating pretty much consistently for about 3 weeks now. So 30 years. And then I just went to a skate park for the first time. And of course, I still suck. I even worse than before, obviously. I'm now 50 years old. So it's a long time. And I've done a lot of stuff. But anyway, so I'm a bit sore today because yesterday I went to the skate park in Brooklyn and fell on my ass. Yeah, falling over, exactly. But I got pads and I'm trying to just relearn the like crappy things I could do 30 years ago, which was never really super fantastic to begin with. But I could do some basic things like pop shove-its, kickflip, ollie, grind, 50-50. Disasters, stuff like that. So nothing super, super impressive, but I'm hoping to put a video up of me relearning all this crap. Anyway, so I see a question actually from Pooja Soni. Can higher order theories help solve the meta problem of consciousness? Yeah, that's a good question. So let me just sip this coffee to stall for a second. All right. The meta problem of consciousness. That's Chalmers' new. I guess it's not really new because he's always had this, but he's written a new paper on this that's kind of gotten attention. So the basic idea behind the meta problem is the question of why we think consciousness is puzzling. So the hard problem is the question of how a physical system could give rise to consciousness at all. And in particular, then why it's associated, any physical state is associated with this kind of consciousness as opposed to none or something like that. So the meta problem is, in a sense, why is there a hard problem? Or I guess we should say, why do I think there's a hard problem? Why do people think there is? So one way you could respond to that is to say, well, gee, people don't really think there's a hard problem. And this is an area where, honestly, I don't know what to think because I used to be a regular person, I think, before I started studying philosophy and went down this journey when I took my first philosophy class in 1994. And if you know some history about me, then, I was raised in a religious house and I've always had these kind of thoughts and stuff like that because I was exposed to these kind of ideas early through being raised in a religious household. But anyway, I digress. The point though is that it's not clear to me. I know I'm waffling here, but it's not clear to me 100%, to be honest, that the intuitions behind the hard problem are as widespread as people like Chalmers think they are. By what I mean is that the ordinary person on the street, if you cornered them and just walked up to them and said, hey, you, and I tried to do that once on the subway in my way to work and didn't work out very well. But I always thought it would be good to just walk up to some random people on the train and kind of ask them, what do you think about consciousness, and see what their intuitions are. And they've done some X-Fi on this, and I don't really know how I feel about that. But it's not clear to me that once you get people to understand what the question is, that they really are puzzled in the way that Chalmers tends to think that they are. Because, I don't know. Anyway, but I think that's an open question. So let me just put that there. That I would just flag that. But if you get past that, then the question of the meta problem is, why do we think there's a hard problem? And Chalmers thinks that you can kind of, assess a theory by how well it does at answering this question that Pooja's asking over here. And I see these other questions, AL, that you're asking, so I'm gonna get to those in a second once I stop talking about this, I guess. Anyway, so I don't know if I agree with that for the reason I just said. So why should a theory of consciousness have to tell us why we think consciousness is weird? I guess that's a bit strange. What we would want is a theory of consciousness. And then we would want to, I guess we would want to know about whether there's a hard problem left over, and if so, why this theory of consciousness, which let's just assume that we thought we had good reason to think it were true, why it would give rise to consciousness. On the other hand, I sometimes think, why do we need an answer to that question? Why should a theory of consciousness, suppose that there's consciousness and that there's a theory of consciousness which actually sort of captures the nature or essence of it, then why is it a criteria on that theory's being correct that it allows us to understand how consciousness could be physical? Well, I don't know. What if that's not something we can understand, and that means it's not physical? Yeah, certain sorts of rationalism will get you to that position. But if you guys, have a general kind of love-hate relationship with rationalism and the a priori, because I sort of feel like a pull towards it, but I'm highly skeptical. And so if I were a rationalist, then yeah, I guess that would be something I would think. But I tend to think that while we can have, this is way going down a rabbit hole here, but I think we can have a priori justification for beliefs, maybe. I can have reasons to believe things that don't depend on experience, but I'm not really sure we can have knowledge of necessary facts about reality. Anyway, so therefore, can higher order theories help solve the meta problem of consciousness? I'm not really sure they need to. That's a long-winded way of saying that I don't really know why. I don't really understand, unless you buy into this modal rationalism idea, why a type B physicalist couldn't just say, we don't need to understand it, it's just brute, that's what it is. And we already know the costs associated with that view, right? They've been explored or whatever. But so that's one thing that I think. So one thing I think is, is there something to explain at all? Then another thing that I think is, even if there is something that looks like it should be explained, do we really think a theory of consciousness should do that? But then, okay, so suppose you get all the way down, then certain versions of the higher order theory, I think, could address that issue. Chalmers thinks not. But I think if what you think is that the way that I think of things, you have this higher order representation that represents you as having this mental life with these, characters showing up, first order states of pain and seeings of blue and hearings of sounds and, thoughts and so forth. In other words, the experience we generally have, the representational contents of these higher order states, if anything like that is sort of on the right track, who knows? It's an empirical question, in my opinion. That's not yet answered. But if the contents of those representations sort of represent you as having this primitive acquaintance-like connection to these perceptible properties and these Eden-like properties, right? These perfectly red and simple properties in the case of red, and perfectly trumpet-sounding things in the case of trumpet sounds. I don't know. Those things, you know, if they're the contents of these higher order representational states, then I think that this might give us a sense of why we're puzzled about consciousness, because we represent ourselves as being in these states. And that's a general, you know, I think a way that a lot of these theories would solve that, or try to attempt to address this meta problem. Of course, I would do it in a like phenomenal realist way, and I would deny illusionism and all that stuff. But anyway, so then I think that, yeah, certain versions of it can help solve the meta problem. But also, I've said things like, you know, one problem here is that the way we conceptualize consciousness right at the beginning is very problematic. So, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty much convinced that before I knew about philosophy, I was just a straight up naive realist. I thought that the physical world around me had properties like red and the trumpet sound that we were talking about earlier. I thought they were just like the redness of the apple was part of the apple. And I remember being in my philosophy class in college, and the philosophy professor, this guy, Jim Cyphers, he was at SF State actually. And he was saying, oh, just offhand, this was like an ethics class. It really had nothing to do with what he was talking about, except parenthetically, he said, oh, red light isn't really red. It's just wavelengths of a certain sort. And I was like, I remember the exact moment. I was like, what? No. And I raised my hand. I was in the class. And I was like, Professor, wait a minute. So you're saying red light is not red? And he was like, yeah, of course it's not red. It's just these wavelengths, and it produces in us the experience of red. And I was like, no. And we had a little bit of an argument there. And then, of course, you know, I realized many thousands of years later that that's sort of the standard view post Galileo. So it's been a long time. But I don't think the ordinary person, the message hasn't really got out. There's some people who find it intuitive that the colors are sort of mental. Other people, they just were like, sort of like me. I teach now. So when I see the students, a lot of students have the reaction that I had when you talk this way to them. They're just like puzzled by it. So I really think that the starting place is a kind of like, it's out there, man. That's where the redness is. So once you learn a lot about physics and the brain or whatever, illusions, hallucination, blah, 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 then you can kind of be pushed back. Oh, the mind's generating all this stuff. And okay, so then there's a puzzle here about how the brain could be doing that, or, you know, what evidence we have for it, whatever. So I think part of the problem here is that when we realize that, made that leap, this is sometimes called the relocation story. So when we say, aha, so the redness isn't really out there, it's in the mind, then the way that we conceptualize the redness originally as a simple primitive property of the physical object now gets imported into the mind. Now we think of it as a simple primitive property of a mental state or a person or something like that. So I actually think that's part of the problem, is that the way we think about it leads us to this idea that the thing we're trying to explain is this simple thing, but maybe it has structure. And so the structure could possibly be something like these higher order things that I've talked about, but who knows? So that's the way I'd say about the meta problem. Feel free to can answer back if you want to, by the way. I wish I had some way to actually talk to you guys, but I don't know how to do that. I'm not that fancy. But let's see here. Let's see. A question I have about philosophy of mind. Do you believe that Mary from Mary's Room learns something when she sees red? Yeah, I do. So I do. In fact, I had in my old podcast, I don't know if you guys know about I do this consciousness live thing now, but in the old days, my first podcast was Space Time Mind with Pete Mandic. And that was really how I learned about podcasts, actually. And it was all his work and stuff. And I just hung out and argued with him. But anyway, so we had a whole big episode on just this question. He has a paper on this, which is very interesting. Pete Mandic, if you don't know his work, he's a very cool guy, also a great philosopher in my opinion. Anyway, okay. So I've always had the intuition that yes, of course she learns something. She learns what it's like to see red. But so what are you supposed to make of that? Well, I think the knowledge argument is extremely messy, and that's why it's not the best There are people who really like it. I don't, because I think it's not the clearest way to get at these issues. But my thought has always been, look, you know what? Come on, man. If you don't have the right kinds of concepts, then of course you're not going to be able to make certain kinds of deductions. So suppose that Mary was in her room, but she never had the concept of water, right? She just, maybe we had some kind of cosmic censorship so that anytime anyone talked about water, it just got beeped out. But when they talk about H2O, it was fine. So maybe she just never heard the word water. She doesn't know about people talking about water. So she's ignorant of all that stuff, but she sees the stuff happening and knows about H2O. So could she deduce that water is H2O? I don't know. It's sort of, if she doesn't have that concept, then how's she going to make that deduction, right? So maybe you'll say she would come up with the concept of water from H2O. Well, I don't know. It's not that clear to me. So it seems to me that she would need the concept. And once she had the concept, then she would be able to make that connection. So if she's in her room and she doesn't have the phenomenal concept, by which I mean the concept that allows her to think about her conscious experience, which she by definition cannot have because she's never had the experience. I mean, not by definition, like a type will argue maybe she could anyway. So in other words, what I think is that once she has the experience and can like acquire the information, oh, this is what it's like to see red. She has the, the concept for it, the phenomenal concept, then I think she could make the deductions. And actually, I've tried to sort of argue for that in my paper, Deprioritizing the a priori arguments against physicalism, by giving you a thought experiment involving someone I called Maria, going the other direction, who was raised in a sort of phenomenological room instead of a black and white room. So Maria is raised by a phenomenologist and taught from early age to bracket the external world and simply to focus on conscious experience and to describe it in detail and so forth. So sort of the opposite of Mary. She doesn't learn any physical like science, but she's Mary level intelligence. So once she becomes a master phenomenologist, introspector, then she learns about the brain. And so I have the intuition that she'll be able to make these kinds of deductions. So I don't really think that it has the sort of impact that people want it to have unless you sort of smuggle in these ideas about concepts. Anyway, so that's what I would say about that, or one of the things that I would say. And then let's say it says, or do you think what it's like to see red can be deduced by someone with perfect rationality from the sort of knowledge you can learn in books? Okay, so I think I answered that already. I think they could make that deduction. So that's why in this paper that I wrote, it's called Deprioritizing the a priori arguments, because, like I said, I have this ambivalence about the a priori. So some days I hate it, some days I can sort of see why someone would like it. So it's not like I want to be like a Quine type and be like, dude, fuck the a priori, death to the a priori. No, like Michael Devitt, one of my professors, who was like, he wrote a paper called No Room for the A Priori. He's just like extremely against this very idea that a priori knowledge is something we can understand or rely on. There are people like that are just dyed-in-the-wool Quinians, and Chalmers recognizes that. He calls them type Q physicalists. He says, if you're sufficiently skeptical about all this stuff, then all of these arguments just don't touch you at all. And yeah, that's right. But I take the a priori a little bit more seriously than that, because I have I feel a lot of these pulls and the like intuitive pull of it. So I think that like a perfectly rational being, like perfectly rational, not like me, like a dumb shit, but like a real perfectly rational, like a super intelligence, and not like the dumb super intelligences that we think of when we write our little movies, because when, kind of Nick Bostrom point, when you think of the scale of the level of intelligence, the difference between an ant and Einstein is very small. If you think about, the comparison between a super intelligence and us. Anyway, I know. So some people start saying I'm talking too much in there. I'll sing a lullaby, man. I do it for my kids. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. Anyway, so all of this is what I'm saying is that, yeah, could a perfectly rational who had the conscious experience make the relevant deduction? My intuition is yeah. So I don't want to throw the a priori arguments out. I just think that right now they're not really useful because we don't have enough information on either side, really. We don't know the right way to conceptualize consciousness. We don't know all the physical facts. So we're sort of fumbling around here on both sides of the equation. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. Yeah, this epistemic distinction has any ontological consequence. Okay, so yeah, that's a separate issue. I think you're right. So you could go either way about that, but that's what I'd say about the epistemic side. Let's see. Carlos asks me, are you a physicalist, a dualist, or defend another ontological framework, and why? Yeah. So I guess my primary commitment is to no one has ever given me good reason to think physicalism is false-ism. Is that a ism? So I don't know if physicalism is true, honestly. I don't really think that we can be in a position to know that right now. I think maybe someday we could, if there's knowledge, that maybe we can come to that, have that knowledge. But I don't think we have it now. But what I would argue for and what I actually believe is just that it hasn't been shown to be false. There aren't any compelling reasons to think that physicalism isn't true. And there are some reasons to think that, like dualism, for example, isn't true of a certain kind. Boring reasons. Inductive empirical reasons, those are the ones I take the most seriously. Like I said, a priori, just a little bit of a skeptic. A priori justification, I actually think you can have that. Like a little comment I made earlier is I think you can, you might be able to tell a story about how it is that I could come to believe something, have a reason for believing it that wasn't based on experience of mine, if it were like evolutionarily built in or something like that, because of my ancestors' experience. Like maybe some ancestor of the first mammal or something had some hardware built in, eventually encoding like mathematical axioms or something. I don't know. Who knows? You could tell any kind of just so story you want. The question is why I think it's true, obviously. But anyway, so I really do think that I don't know the answer to the, so I'm not a physicalist, I'm not a dualist, but the one thing I won't give up is the idea that the mind and the brain, whatever they ultimately are, interact with each other and in a causal way. So epiphenomenalism, while logically possible, is just something that I don't think I can believe. So we can't rule it out, but if there's a consistent non-epiphenomenal view, epiphenomenalism, the idea that the conscious experience could be caused by the brain, but doesn't do any causing back. So why think epiphenomenalism at all? Well, the answer, of course, is the history of neuroscience has revealed so far no missing causes. So whenever we see a neuron do something, there's always a physical cause for why the neuron did what it did in terms of something in the environment or some other neuron doing something, some chemical neurotransmitter, blah, blah, blah. If dualism were true of a certain kind, you would expect to find eventually like, where did this come from? Like this neuron just sort of started doing something, but no thing in the environment impacted it and nothing internally impacted it. And we haven't found that. And nothing in the causal sequence of the neurons doing what they do. I teach an intro to neuroscience class, and when you look at what neurons do, it's a lot of sodium ions potassium ions, these little protein channels opening and closing, things going in and out. It's all very mechanical, elegant, sophisticated, interesting, but nonetheless mechanical. So that's again, no place which we see an opening for a non-physical cause. So that makes me think that, this kind of general idea that all of the behaviors of the animal can be explained by the physical causes in here. So why can't consciousness be explained that way as well? I mean, that's the hope of the physicalist, is that consciousness will be just like all the other stuff, like water and, that other general stuff. So again, while I'm not I wouldn't say I know that physicalism is true. I do think I don't have any reason to deny it. And generally, I think physicalism is a consistent worldview. And so I guess that would be the ontological framework I would defend. But I wouldn't go so far as to say, look, I know that it's false, because there are some kinds of dualism that I take more seriously than this kind of substance dualism I was just mentioning, which I think is sort of, you have to bite a lot of bullets to take it seriously. But there's a kind of like quantum mechanical dualism that I can almost take seriously. Panpsychism, maybe idealism. These are views, and obviously if you've followed my consciousness live discussions, you can see that I take that stuff seriously, because I have these people on who I think are defending it in interesting ways, and I don't try to just tear it down, but I try to understand the arguments for it and why they think the things they do and so forth. Anyway, so yeah, I generally think that philosophy is hard. That's my general assessment, is philosophy is hard, and it's hard to know what to think. But even so, I don't think I've seen any reason to reject physicalism. All right, so feel free to come back at me, by the way. So let's see. Adam is asking me something. If my touch experience would switch with my seeing experience, ST, each one now represents the sensory information of the other, I wouldn't even notice. What's ST mean? I don't know what that means. It's something each. Yeah, I don't know what ST means, but sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. So, but if my touch experience would switch with my seeing experience, each one now represents the sense. So do you mean, but you say experience, but now you say information. So they represent, I don't understand the point of this assertion here. Seems to me that that would not be the case. So maybe you'll clarify that later. But why should we think that touch experience switching with seeing experience would be such that you wouldn't notice? Oh, well, so let's go. I'll ask that question back to you. Why? So Pooja says, if I miss saying your name, I'm sorry. Then please tell me. Any ordinary person definitely would contemplate about the metaphysical stuff. Well, I didn't say metaphysical stuff. I said the meta problem. Be a God or even consciousness. So I guess it is a problem for everyone, just like the concept of God is for all. No. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying there, but the meta problem is not metaphysics. Obviously people, I thought about consciousness. I mean, before I became a philosopher, when I was a kid, I remember going to the doctor's office and the doctor saying, where does it hurt? And I was like, how does it feel? And I was like, I don't know. Like, can't you come and I just show you? So the privacy of the mental was something I struggled with. Like, why can't you know my conscious experiences? My sister had a very low tolerance for pain. I had a very high tolerance for pain. So I was like, we get the same physical injury, but she's really like, and I'm like, man. So those sorts of things, I thought about, yeah, obviously I agree with your point is what I'm saying, that the ordinary person definitely contemplates these. And I was raised in a religious household and, was very much not buying the story I was being told. So I agree with you. Ordinary persons, these are things people that they think about. My question was whether ordinary persons are worried about the hard problem of consciousness as defined by persons like Ned Block and David Chalmers, where they think, how could the brain produce consciousness? And then they just are so puzzled by it that they go on to say it's not possible. It doesn't seem to me that the history of philosophy supports that assertion. There are just as many physicalists in the history of philosophy as dualists. Democritus is a hardcore physicalist, like for real physicalism. We falsified that kind of physicalism, but nonetheless, it's the point is that he was a physicalist, right? He didn't find any problem. He wasn't sort of baffled by how consciousness could be physical. Same with Hobbes. Those are just two famous examples. There are plenty of others. So anyway, that was what I was questioning. AC says, thanks. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, the paper deprioritizing the a priori arguments. I mean, it's published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. It was, I presented that paper at the first online consciousness conference. Do you guys know about that thing I did? I'm kind of proud of that. I did it for 5 years, but it became too much work. But the online consciousness conference, Consciousness Online, it's still on, most of it's still there at that website. But anyway, so that paper, I got a lot of feedback on it, including from Dave Chalmers himself and Richard Chappell. I don't know if you know who that is, one of his students. Anyway, so I still to this day don't think I've seen a convincing response to that kind of argument. In fact, I was talking to Dave Chalmers recently about this, and he said maybe he'll come on Consciousness Live again to talk about specifically like zombies and shambies. That's my name for the reverse, what Keith Frankish calls anti-zombies. Although I think there's some differences between him and I. Anyway, okay. So that would probably be next year, 2022, because he has a book coming out on virtual reality and technology and techno-philosophy that I'm excited about, by the way, and I highly approve of that book, I mean. Anyway, so maybe we'll get to talk about some of these issues. Let's see. Adam says again, red is a label representing the brain activity state resulted by the interaction of the brain. Okay, so that's maybe. I must go to sleep. Okay, cool. A recommendation for a philosophy of mind textbooks. Well, yeah, there's a few of them. I mean, Josh Weisberg has a nice kind of book on consciousness. That's an introductory level guy, hired at there. But Pete Mandic has a philosophy of, I think it's called This is Philosophy of Mind, which is a good one. As an anthology, I've always liked the David Chalmers anthology, Philosophy of Mind's coming out with a new edition. So those are the books that I would recommend. This is Philosophy of Mind by Pete Mandic. To be honest, I don't know. I don't want to be mean to my friends, but they are very traditional in their coverage. Like they go through behaviorism, functionalism. If I were to write a book on philosophy of mind, I don't know if I would cover that stuff as much, but I'm more interested in like transhumanism, the singularity, computational theories, and those things hardly ever show up in those kind of books. But anyway, they're still good books. I don't know if there really is a like intro textbook written on that kind of stuff from a philosophy of mind point of view. Okay, but anyway, so if I don't know, but that counts as current landscape or not. Let's see, Enigma Conjecture. Do you think quantum mechanics quantum mechanical entanglement is relevant to understanding consciousness and theory of mind? Yeah. No, I don't. Well, it could be, but what I really think is that consciousness. How shall I put this delicately? Well, why should I be delicate? It's early in the morning on a Sunday, right? Or where I am anyway. Consciousness is a psychological phenomenon. It's a mental thing. It lives at that level, I would say. So is quantum mechanics or quantum mechanical considerations, are they relevant for understanding the mind at all? Maybe. In terms of if our fundamental theory of physics has got to help us understand physical systems, and the brain is a physical system. So obviously the quantum mechanics has got to apply to it, or at least the version, I don't think quantum mechanics is going to be replaced. I don't think that's how science works, but it's got to be we need a quantum theory of gravity, which we don't have, obviously. We have candidates, which I would cheer for, and so would you probably, but cheer for different ones, whatever. So yeah, I don't think it's super obvious that entanglement all by itself is relevant to consciousness or the mind. I think it's possible. So if you have some things, some people might say, well, look, here's how it's possible, how it's relevant, because if the mind is computational, or the brain, the physical system that implements mind is a computational system, well, it's very limiting to say it's a classical computational system. Perhaps instead, it's a non-classical system, computing in a non-classical way. And maybe it could be a kind of quantum computer. So there are people like Stuart Hamerhoff who, have hypothesized that maybe there's quantum computations occurring in the microtubules of neurons. And this could be happening. So if you want to estimate like the computational power of the brain, according to Hamerhoff, it's been wildly underestimated by traditional neuroscientists who are just counting neuron spikes or whatever, these spike trains, and estimating the computational power that way, whereas he thinks it could be many, 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 many orders of magnitude higher, more than that. So in that sense, maybe, although, and I'm going to try to get Stu on my Consciousness Live eventually. I haven't, the problem is I ask people, then they tend to say yes, or they say no, but if they say yes, they're like, how about next week? And I'm like, So anyway, but that is something that I have planned for my next season, which I call next year. So, but of course, we don't understand quantum entanglement very well. We understand the math of it. It works perfectly, but what does it mean ontologically is something we're still debating. That's where the interpretations of quantum mechanics come in, and so forth and so on. So the answer to your question is, well, and earlier I said that the kind of dualism that I guess I would be like most supportive of is a kind of quantum dualism, whereby consciousness collapses the wave function, or has some kind of role to play there. I think that's the kind of dualism that I would be most willing to entertain seriously, besides panpsychism, or maybe, anyway. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. So Mike asked me, what do I think of Mark Solm's theory? Consciousness is a function that occurs in the brainstem. I'm going to try to talk to Mark. Oh, wait, am I actually? Because let's see. I'm looking at my calendar here because I was supposed to do it in September. I'm supposed to write an update for my interviewing things. Oops, I'm looking in the wrong. Holy moly. Okay. One of these days I'll learn how to use my calendar. Aha. Yeah. So I'll be talking with Mark Solms on September 17th on Consciousness Live. And so I haven't read his book yet on this, but I've seen his Twitter presence and I've read this paper that he wrote on this. I co-teach this class at the Graduate Center with Tony Rowe, the neuroscientist, on consciousness, neuroscience, and philosophy. And one of the students, one of very good students in that class, sent me this paper and was like, what do you think of it? So I read it and I was like, I think he's really confused. I think I said this on Twitter, actually. So I'm not convinced by this brainstem stuff. It's not that I think that it's false or obviously false or something. It's just I don't think we know that it's true. And people assume it's based on behavior. And it seems dangerous to me. to make that kind of assumption. It depends on what you're doing. So, and I'm writing a paper on this right now for the Journal of Consciousness Studies, a special issue on animal consciousness, which I think is related because it's the issue of how do you know that a system is conscious if it can't report to you verbally that I'm conscious? So I think if you're doing ethics, then you just assume they're conscious and treat them as such. It doesn't matter. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but you should just treat them as such. But if you're doing science, then you can't just assume that they're conscious. So there's a methodological issue here, I think, not an ethical or metaphysical issue, but one of method. How do you show that a system is conscious? And of course, that's hard. So I think there's room for debate, and we don't really know, and so forth. But I don't think I haven't been convinced that we should rule out the cortex, and in particular, the various areas in the not back areas of the cortex. But I'm willing to be convinced. So I'm going to check out his book and have this conversation and see what I think about it after that. I was also going to talk to Donald Hoffman, but he had to cancel. And I had another cancellation you guys probably know about. I was going to talk to Noam Chomsky. He canceled because of personal reasons. But I'm hoping that he said he'll reschedule in the fall, hopefully. Chomsky will. Hoffman, I don't think so. He said, I have personal things and here's some colleagues of mine you can talk to. So maybe I'll talk to them. But anyway, so I'm supposed to be announcing these things at some point on my Twitter account or my blog. I don't know. I'm bad at this stuff, guys. I'm old, okay? I know old people sometimes can get with it, but I'm still trying to figure out how to relearn the kickflip. Okay, so moving on then. Adam again says, why would Mary, sorry, Mary, expect to know what's read in physical reality? A description of the phenomena is not the phenomena itself. Reading about model of the sun. Yeah, I know. I agreed with that, I guess. Okay, so great. Such that. Oh, someone said ST means such that. Holy shit, I did not know that. Such that. Oh, fancy. I didn't know there was fancy, whatever you call those texting lingo things for intellectual discussions. Good. Okay. Well, I'm hip to that now. Okay. Let's see. Eigenvector says, if physicalism claims that only that which belongs to our present physical theories exists, it seems to be false. Okay, but if physicalism claims that only that which belongs to ideal, it's unclear. So that's your classic Hempel dilemma or something. Is that what that is? So current physics is probably false and future physics is not well defined. Yeah, so that's the traditional problem trying to define physicalism. You think that's an objection? That's taken that shows that's what? So I'm not sure why you said that is what I'm saying, because you could go many ways with that. Yeah, I'm aware of that objection, obviously. I'm not persuaded that it shows any problems with physicalism, though. So I am curious why you would say that. Okay, so let's see. I see a lot here, so I'm kind of just cruising through these things. If you want to say something again, you know, if I ask you anyway. Mary's room corresponds with physicalism and necessary physical interactions. No magical, comma, hama, ha. Such that, haha, sorry. Okay, so yeah, people are telling me such that because they will represent executive brain received from the organ. So, you know, that there is a phenomenon called sensory substitution. So maybe that's the kind of thing that you're trying to get at. I don't know. So are you guys familiar with this? I actually found out about this accidentally. I remember I was an undergraduate at SF State, or maybe I just entered graduate school. I forget. But there was I was in a philosophy class and some guy showed up halfway through the class and the professor said, oh, this is a guy who approached me and said, could I sit in on the class? And it was philosophy of mind class. And the professor, who was Kent Bach, this guy, He said, yes. And so it turns out that this person was either, I think, the grandson or the son of this neuroscientist, Paul Bach-y-Rita. And so he told us about sensory substitution. That was the first time I heard about it. But it's this idea. So you could take someone who's blind, you put glasses on them with a camera, you hook the camera up to a computer and a computer up to these little tapping things, which tap either like on someplace on your back or someplace in your mouth. So a simple way to visualize this, if a baseball's coming at you, the further away the baseball is, the taps are slower. As it gets closer, they get faster and faster. So you get some sort of information about the speed of the ball, in other words, encoded in the rate of the tapping. That's just a simple example. It turns out that people sometimes say they have quasi-visual experiences as a result of this. So I don't think they have like normal visual experiences, but they have, like, they say they see like enough to be able to hit the ball with a bat, for example. And there's been a lot of work done this. I think they do this now at the University of Glasgow. They have that, what is it called? The Center for the Study of Perceptual Experience that Fiona McPherson or somebody I think is involved with. Anyway, sensory substitution. So that's interesting because it looks like the modality of touch is getting information about something visual, and you sort of have a visual experience. So maybe that's the sort of thing that Adam was talking about, touch information and visual information being swapped or something. It's representing the same information, but in the form of touch. And then so but I always thought that anyway, so is that what is that the kind of thing you had in mind? Yeah, so it's not clear to me what to think about this. Is this a case of indirect perception where you perceive the taps as indicating the speed? And then you have these kind of top-down effects producing this sort of visual effect, or is it? Yeah, so I'm not sure if that was what you had in mind, but I really still don't understand why you would say that touch information and visual information can be swapped and you wouldn't notice, because it does seem like people do notice. And it's not just representing the information that matters, but you would say, at least I would say that because obviously, backing up 500 steps, we want to explain the difference. There clearly is a difference between thinking about red and experiencing red. So when I think, red is a warm color. And when I see red, like I have my glasses, this is my little cleaning thing right here that I use for my glasses, which I never used to wear, but now I'm old. My eyes have gone. So I have this little red thing I'm looking at. It says Ray-Ban on it. Wonderful. That red thing right there, when I visually look at it, as opposed to when I think about it, there's a difference, but I'm representing the same thing as in the same way, in some sense, as being red, one with a thought, one with an experience. So there's got to be clearly something that's different there. So I would say you have to appeal to some content difference in the representation if we're doing representational stuff. So in the one case, I visually represent it as red. And in the other case, I conceptually or in a thought-like way represent it as red. So I would say that that matters. And if you just swap the information, but not the, I guess Chalmers calls this the manner of representation, or instead of the mode, right? So it's the way it represents it, in other words, visually versus auditorily. So I think that's part of the content of these higher states that I talk about a lot. So therefore, I don't think simply swapping the information is enough to get the thing you're talking about. But yeah. Let's see. Desitron says or asks, have you seen the YouTube series by John something or another? Vervaeke, Greg Henriquez, called Untangling the World Knot? Nope, I haven't seen it. They have an interesting approach. I haven't seen it, but I'll check it out. The world knots. I know that's an old expression. What is that? Was that Einstein or something? I forget who said that. I know that Feigl or someone like that has a quote about this entangled knot in the mind-body problem, but I don't know if you call it the world knot. Anyway, Let's see. Artin says, hello, you seem to hold materialism as a default ontology. Could you please give some solid reasons why that ontology is the most plausible one? Yes. Do I hold that materialism is the default ontology? I guess in a way I do. And so I'm not sure if you, or maybe if you're speaking of materialism, like generally speaking, about like physicalism about everything, or physicalism about the mind in particular. When you're speaking of default views, yeah, so let's take them both then, therefore, I mean, just to be safe. So just limiting it, because you could just be a materialist about the mind and not about numbers. That's a coherent position. That's not my position, but you could have it. Let's suppose you had that position. So what would be a good reason for thinking that the mind is physical, but even if there are other non-physical things that exist? One is, I think, this mental causation stuff that we were talking about. I think that's a solid reason. The other is more, I mean, metaphysical. So I think that at the bottom of it, what physicalism or materialism is simply the claim that reality is, in a sense, not mental. Because of this Hempel dilemma thing or whatever we were talking about earlier. So I think that if you had to like appeal to something mental, intentionality, phenomenality, something like that, as part of your theory of how the physical world worked, then we would have serious reasons to doubt physicalism. But we haven't, except maybe in the case of quantum mechanics, and that's highly debatable. But we haven't, except for a not debatable case, found any such reasons. So that's the reason why I think materialism is the most plausible in that sense. Now, why not idealism? Why not idealism? Well, it depends on what kind of idealism that you mean. So like there's this objective idealism of the kind that some people like Bernardo Kastrup, who I've talked to, hold. And I think even like Helen Yetter Chapel has a version of this, I think. I actually personally don't really understand the difference between a view that's called cosmopsychism, like Goff has, and idea. So who knows? So all of those views depend on the first step of getting there is this conceivability argument against physicalism, which I just don't find motivating. I have a conceivability argument against dualism, which is the conceivability of what I call shambis, physical beings which have consciousness and no non-physical properties. Perfectly conceivable, no contradiction. In fact, Chalmers told me he thinks there is a contradiction, but I don't think there is. He's smarter than me, so maybe he's right. But I have him back on to talk about that. So those are the reasons why I think that materialism is the default ontology, because we just don't have any reasons not to think it is. That's why. So you don't think those are solid reasons, probably, but I don't think your reasons for rejecting materialism are solid either. So someone probably begs the question here at some point, you or me, one of us, but who? That's the point of my or that's one of the points I try to make in that paper I've mentioned a couple of times by now, is that we can't tell right now. We need more empirical work, but we also need more phenomenological work. We don't have an objective phenomenology. We don't agree on basic facts about consciousness. And I don't mean metaphysical, I mean as experience. Like, is it representational? We don't agree on that. Is there overflow? Is there more than do you experience more than you can report? We don't agree on that. So it's not only that we don't know enough about the physical side, which I think is true. We don't know enough about the brain. It's like comical how much we don't know about the brain. But it's also comical how much we don't know about our own minds from the first person because of all these debates. You think you know, and then you start meeting these people and it's like, do you have mental imagery? Like, I don't know. Can you tell? Is there overflow? How do you know? So I really don't think that, I think the burden is on the other side, on the non-physicalist side, to try to show why we should think that, what reasons we have for rejecting physicalism, as opposed to, now again, I don't, yeah, it's like a default view because it explains everything that we've seen so far. So that would be my sort of reasoning about that, but I don't know if that really answers your question or if you think that's satisfactory. So, come back at me if you feel. All right, so Pooja says again, thinking about the mind in some sense requires some level of self-reflection. Yeah, because once you start to think about yourself as an object of thought, then you tend to think about consciousness. Okay, so think about consciousness doesn't matter if you are a materialist, physical, right? I think that's, I mean, I agree. Yeah. I do, though. I guess the one area where I disagree, right, with what you just said is that I would say, even if we never introspected and didn't know about consciousness per se, we would still have a lot of these same issues just talking about physical objects. Like, how could that object be read in this way? I think that question is equally as puzzling as the question, how could my brain give rise to this experience? So, Chalmers talks about this world, this hypothetical world called Eden, which is the way we perceive it. So in this possible world, Eden, physical objects just are read. The sounds are out there in the environment, that sort of thing. You're just right about that stuff, and you have this sort of direct contact with them. So is that conceptually possible? Well, I don't know, because the redness would have to be like somehow up on the physical object. That's just as puzzling to me as how it could be experienced, like how it could be there when I'm not looking at it. Anyway, so I don't really think that the issue is about these qualities that show up in our experience, and they're puzzling in their own right, in a way. Anyway, I'm going to be talking to Adam Pouts in a couple of weeks, who's a philosopher, a brilliant young philosopher, also a skater, better than me, I think, at this point. But anyway, I wonder if he still skates. Well, I'm going to ask him that. I don't think he does, actually. Maybe he does. I don't know. Anyway, but he has a book on perception and representation coming out, which is really, truly excellent. So I'm going to get, and he's not a physicalist. So we're going to be talking about this stuff. Okay, so yes, I agree. So who am I is probably the first place to start, and then ask, what is consciousness? Yeah, personal identity is another one of, I think it's related. I'm not sure why you need to start there first as opposed to start with consciousness. I think they're separate issues, to be clear. And personal identity is extremely difficult to make sense of. It's like, do I think I was the same person when I was 5 as I am now? I talked to Susan Schneider about this, and she has this book, Digital You, which is a great book. And she was arguing, commonsensically, we think so, but I was like, I don't know. But so her thought experiment was, look, if someone traveled back in time and put a gun to 6-year-old Yu's head, you would care a lot about that. And I was like, okay, but what does that show? Does that show that I think I'm the same as that 6-year-old me? Or does it show that, I'd feel the same way if you put a gun to my grandfather's head? Because if you killed him, then my father, my mother wouldn't have me, so that indirectly would affect me. Is it the same like killing my 6-year-old me self? Is it the same in the sense that I'm like an offspring of that, a descendant? This is like a Parfit style view, Derek Parfit. I don't know. So I can make sense of that view, but on the other hand, I make sense of the other view. I don't know. So personal identity is very difficult. And I think that, they're right, that there's one question like, can you upload consciousness to a digital environment? That's one question. Another question is, will the uploaded consciousness count as still being you? That's another question. Anyway, so I agree in a sense, but then in another sense, I don't. Okay, let's see. Hi, have you ever, let's see, this is Veronica, or well, there's a weird accent there, so maybe I don't know how to say it. Have you ever known any philosopher that believes in soulmates for real? No, I haven't. Adam says again, Hoffman's theory kind of bewildering. I'm missing how come it doesn't self-defeating claim. I mean, so is it self-defeating to say that evolution isn't built to produce creatures that are aiming at truth, and yet now here's something true? This is a line of argument that you also see in the philosophy of religion from people like Alvin Plantinga. So here's what I was trying to think about how much I really want to say about this, because there's a lot that you could say, but one thought that I would say is that we human beings have been doing some self-selecting, evolutionarily speaking. Humans are still evolving. Some people have this idea that we've stopped evolving. We haven't. Students have asked me, if evolution is true, then why are humans the same? Because it takes a long time. And yes, we haven't evolved much in the last 10,000 years or so, but I saw a paper recently that showed some differences. Anyway, okay, so we are still evolving. And 100,000, 200,000 years from now, I mean, it's interesting to think like 100,000 years ago, modern humans showed up possibly. Like that's the sort of picture scientifically that we think is true. About, people will debate you. So let's just say 200,000 years, somewhere to be safe. So think about 200,000 years from now. That's a long time. So that's not the year 10,000. That's the year 200,000. So in the year 200,021, which they will probably call something different by then, because we're in the year 2021, 2021, not 200,000. What will science look like? Will they look back on us and think we're silly like Aristotle, like how we think about Aristotle? That was only a few thousand years ago. So I think human beings have a very myopic view. And if you take this long-term view, like 1,000 years is a long time in human history. And 1,000 years ago was the Dark Ages. In the year 1021, things were not so great in Europe. And I don't know really much about the history in other places, but maybe you can tell me if you know something about that. Anyway, the point is 1,000 years is a long time. And we look at the science of back then and go, yeah, no, that's not it. But will they think that about us 1,000 years from now, 2,000, 100,000? Will we even be remembered? Will we be like, is this the information age? Is going to be the Bronze Age of super intelligence? Who knows, right? So when you think in these long time scales, it's extremely humbling, but also makes these ideas clearer. So in the last 10,000 years or so of human history, human beings have been doing selecting. Like, for example, look at our educational system and the intensive effort that we, in the West at least, which is obviously what I'm familiar with, and that's why I'm speaking about it. I don't know anything about education systems in non-US places, to be honest. So I don't know, but at least in the United States, we pretend like we care about education, and we are teaching students, kids, how to read and write since preschool, right? 3 years old, and learning the alphabet, downloading that information into their circuitry. Intensive work on learning how to read and write. Natural language speaking comes naturally. Reading doesn't. Writing doesn't. If you just take a kid and put them around English speakers, they'll speak English. You put them around Chinese speakers, they'll speak Chinese or Cantonese or whatever. If you put them around people who write, they don't pick up writing. They just don't. So you have to drill it into them over and over and over and over, and then math too. So that's a way of self-selecting. We make sure as soon it's not born into them, it's not selected by nature to be put into that system so they survive. We decided to put it into them. So all of these abstract ideas about mathematics, some of them are intuitive, and as psychology shows that we have intuitive sense of number up to a certain bit, right? That's sort of innate. But these ideas like algebra, calculus, linear matrices, no, those are not natural. So I do think that we are building, we are selecting ourselves, evolutionarily speaking, for rationality. And I don't mean in a weird eugenics way. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like, sterilizing people with low IQs. No, fuck that shit. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we as a species, as a culture, have decided that these things are important, that knowing some math, learning how to read, knowing how to write, which are not part of our natural endowment and are things that humans have discovered on their own. We have decided that these things are important. And so we are building them in. And I would predict personally that 100,000 years from now or so, in the year 2K21, 200K, sorry, not 2K. Oh, I'm thinking too mapically. Anyway, you get the joke. That these things may be innate in the way that language is now. It would not surprise me if the organisms which survived, if we don't kill ourselves off or whatever, there's that great filter theory, which, who knows? But anyway, so if we make it 100,000 years from now, and there is something called, something sort of like Homo sapiens hanging around, who knows if there would be, if we would still call it that or not. But anyway, I know. Anyway, the point is, maybe those creatures would learn how to read and write in the way that we now learn how to speak automatically. In other words, it's built in. So I don't really know if I agree that that simply because evolution doesn't by itself aim at these sort of things that we can't direct it to. We know about artificial selection. We breed that teacup poodles don't exist in the wild. Neither did broccoli, by the way. Fucking broccoli, dude. Okay, anyway, so yeah. But at the same time, I think that Hoffman's ideas are more about perception than they are about this planting of rationality stuff. And that's different. So Hoffman's idea is that our perceptual systems didn't evolve to represent the way physical reality really is. And that just seems to me obviously kind of true, given that we know that there are many, or we have reason to believe there are many kinds of physical energy sources in the environment right now, which I'm just not sensitive to: ultraviolet light, for example, infrared, et cetera, magnetism, blah, blah, blah. So there's all that stuff. And therefore, what are you going to say? Well, again, I've been convinced by this kind of line of argument that, well, reality would be pretty much how we think that it is. Even in the world where Hoffman's talking about. There'll still be physical objects, there'll still be tables and chairs, because that's what we mean. We mean these things around, that back there. So if that's, there's other things as well, that's not really, doesn't seem to me that means that our perceptions are false or misleading or something like that. So I don't know, but I was interested to talk with him about this because I wanted to know his sort of take on that line, but also, anyway, so yeah, I sort of agree with you. Let's see. C says, have you formed opinions on Eastern Christian treatments of God, potentially RE epistemology? No, I don't even know what that means. Eastern Christian treatments of God. I mean, I know about like monotheistic versions of Hinduism and stuff like that, but I don't know about Eastern Christian treatments of God. So if you could tell me more about it, I could tell you. I mean, I could just tell you about RE epistemology. I'm generally not a big fan of epistemology. Because it seems like, yeah, an area where everything goes. Who knows? It's all intuitions and thought experiments and bullshit. No offense to my epistemologist friends, but yeah. All right, so back on the touch thing. If touch experience would represent the sensory input representing exact pattern encrypting the eye's interaction with some photon, seeing a distant tree. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I still don't quite get it, but it's, if I was to interpret Adam's question into something that I would like in my language, I would say, okay, so is what's going on here something about sensory substitution, like I already went on about, but also is it a question about like, is there a general algorithm that the brain computes with, or are there specific algorithms that it uses in specific neural systems? So some people have taken the sensory substitution stuff to sort of suggest that what any neuron can learn to compute anything the brain does. Like you put this neuron in, like I could take out this one and put it over here and it could learn to do basically what's going on there. Whereas the other idea would be, no, there might be some like firmware or something like, some things that are like a video card. You guys know about these graphic card. It's where the program's built into the hardware to make it faster. So it might be something like that. I don't know. So I'm not sure what to think about what you're saying here. Okay, so let's see. Eigenvector. Oops, I'm way behind on people are actually asking questions. Okay, so that's great. Considered as an ontological principle, the causal closure thesis seems to presuppose a substantial part of what is to be proved. I'm not sure I agree. Considered as an ontological thesis, maybe, but causal closure, at least the way I was presenting it, was an epistemological claim, not an ontological claim. So the thing I was talking about was that we don't have any evidence for non-physical causes. So therefore, it's a reasonable conjecture that the system is closed. And what more do we need to do? So that was the spirit that I was offering those considerations. So epistemology may teach us that what from the internal point of view of physics or of science appear as instrumental barriers may result in being from the point of view of humans only the limits of one of their methodological resources or frameworks. And paraphrasing Wittgenstein, the limits of our physical language as well as those of our scientific language in general do not mean the limits of our world. Okay. Yeah, those are assertions. That's great. Let's see, Veronica says, I have personally experienced a lot of time in my personal life that is the opposite. I've created the life I have through thoughts. Okay, Veronica. I'm not sure seems like it was addressed to something I was saying earlier, maybe. So there's a couple things I would say. First, I don't deny that you can, your attitude affects things, or that your mental, the way you feel or think affects things physically. Not necessarily like magic in reality. Like I don't believe in, manifesting or, I don't believe any of that stuff. But if I'm my thoughts can affect my other physical processing. I interpret certain things in certain ways given my mood and things of that nature. And I certainly think I've created my life with my thoughts since I ended up a philosophy professor, because I planned it, right? Because of my thoughts. So I certainly agree with you, but I'm not sure if you're saying what that's the opposite of. That's the opposite of physicalism. I don't think that is. What you've experienced is that something mental had an effect on something physical. And my claim is that really the only way we can understand that is that if the thing which had the effect was itself physical. So the mental thing should be physical. But maybe I'm misinterpreting what you were saying. So can we agree that Mary's room is a pseudo problem? No, I don't think it's a pseudo problem. I just think it's not helpful. It's not as helpful as like the zombie stuff to focus the issue on physicalism, because there's all sorts of stuff that gets in the way. That was the point I was making. But there's the Chinese room argument. I don't think that's a disgraceful philosophical waste of time. So I don't like the way that Adam is speaking personally, but the way that I see things is that these kinds of thought experiments really should be thought of as, helping you figure out what you think personally, where you lie. But I don't know why the Chinese room is a disgraceful waste of time. It lets you know what you think about these issues. And my personal intuition has always been that, yeah, the room doesn't understand Chinese, but I understand the functionalists think that it does. But I like biological theories. And so, yeah, I agree that's question begging. But the point of the thing is, and I'm not a Searle, I'm not saying, all this proves this is wrong. That is a waste of time, I think. But I think if there's anything that's like a disgraceful waste of time, it's like epistemology. if I would really be serious, if like, oh, is this Gettier proof? I shouldn't use that tone of voice. I can't help it. It's just so annoying to me. Anyway, yeah, so I don't think it's a disgrace. I think that the idea that there elicits in me the intuition that, yeah, something biological matters. Does it prove it? No, but focuses the issue, and that's useful and helpful. So I don't think it's a waste of time. But it's all about reasons. Stupid comment. I know. Apologies. No apologies necessary. But what do you mean it's all about? I know I should keep up with this in real time because you guys are saying things and I'm like way behind. So I don't know what that refers to. What do you think the weight we should put on intuitions and arguments in general? Yeah, exactly. So Zebra Standards was asking that. What do I think the weight of intuitions is? Well, not much. So intuitions are fallible. I've had intuitions that turned out to be wrong. The Grim Reaper paradox is the classic example of that. When the situation is first described, it seems clearly conceivable, and then you think about it and you're like, no. Right? The Grim Reaper paradox, there's some continuous interval of time. There's a Reaper positioned at every moment with an alarm clock set to go off at that time. If it wakes up and you're alive, it kills you. So you're dead by a certain time, but there's no Reaper that can kill you because of the nature of infinity. So once you think through what's going on there, it's not really conceptually possible, or I don't know, maybe depending on if you're dialethous or not. So, but again, history of mathematics, non-Euclidean geometry arose out of a attempt to prove something which people found intuitively correct. The parallel postulate, that parallel lines don't meet. Anyway, long story. Okay, so does that mean that there's no such thing as a priori justification? No, because, we have hallucinations in the perceptual realm and we still think we can be justified, I think. So I wouldn't go so far as to say simply because we make a priori mistakes, that's why we think of idealized reasoners and, things of that sort of stuff. So I think that, yeah, an ideally rational agent with all knowledge, their intuitions would matter. But ours probably don't. And ours are probably subject. but ours are probably being held hostage by theories which we tacitly accept in the background, which is why these kind of thought experiments that we were talking about, which elicit these sorts of intuitions that we have, I think really are telling us information about ourselves, about what we like, where we fall, like what we personally accept. And that's a useful thing, because I do think that philosophy's primary goal is like self-examination. Know thyself. I think that's a serious thing. So anyway, I don't think that's a waste of time. Yeah, so intuitions are a starting point, but they can be overturned by evidence and further reasoning. So I don't think they should just be thrown away, but I think we should be sensitive about these sort of things we've been talking about in the background. So I'm not sure if that answered your question on zebra standards. Geez, already 6:30. So how long am I going to do this for? I guess I never specified. So I got time, so I'm going to keep going. I was going to go and try to hurt myself on the skateboard, but it's raining. So I have some time, but let's see how much I could do. Can you see yourself becoming an idealist? No. It depends on what you mean by idealism. So, on my space-time mind thing with Pete Mendick, our first episode was about idealism. And we talked about it a lot. So I don't know, idealist. Could I ever be convinced that idealism was true? I don't see how you could get to idealism of the kind that maybe CH is talking about, unless you think physicalism is false first, which I don't see any reason to think. So I'd have to be convinced of that. The idealism only starts post failure of physicalism. So therefore, you'd have to make that first leap, and that's what they all try to do, but it doesn't work, in my opinion. That begs the question. So are there other kinds of idealism I could accept? Yeah, like could we be living in a simulation? Sure. Could there be simulations, running in some, who knows what the non-simulated reality is like. So in that sense, would idealism be true? Well, I don't know. In a way, maybe not. There'd be a physical world in the same way I typically think that there is. So I don't think that would be a case where idealism is true. So idealism would have to be like this very specific thing where the thing which was, running the simulation or something like that was a mind. And what reason is there to think that there's a big mind out there? There isn't any reason to think that, in my opinion. Okay, so that's what I'd say about that. But ultimately, if you could convince me, then yeah, idealism is a serious view. I mean, I don't dismiss it out of hand. Where did the impulse, so Martin says, where did the impulse to self-select for writing come from? I get the competitive advantage could be the consequence, but not the origin. Yeah, exactly. That's a good question. So I'm not sure why there has to be an impulse to do it for it to have been done. I think the history of this stuff is not well known, but as far as I understand it, which is limited, not my area of expertise and all that stuff, but as far as I understand it, the idea that we had is that writing originated from solving trade problems. Once kind of cities were developed, and I'm loosely using the word city to mean people living with non-relatives, mostly non-relatives, whereas, more tribal type situations or non-city states would be like mostly the people you're related to, extended family or something like that, cousin, second cousin, etc. Anyway, that's not a hard and fast definition. That's just loosely the way I'm thinking of it. So the earliest writing seems to be, I'm growing some wheat and you have some beer, so I want to trade you, so we keep track of it. That's cuneiform writing, right? Mesopotamia. And I know it developed in other places too, like, in the Americas and obviously hieroglyphics, etc. So I think that it's kind of interesting, actually, in the historical, like if you look at the Tower of Babel stories, that what they're trying to explain is, I don't buy the explanation. They're trying to explain something real. There's a lot of weird language. There's a lot of languages, right? A lot of different. So why are we doing this? So you're right. I don't think that the recognition of the advantage is the reason that we started doing that, but I think that we came up with it because it was useful. And, ancient, myth, who knows if it's true, but methodologically speaking, you can sort of say, like in the Chinese culture, they say, I've heard, not an expert again, but that earliest forms of writings came from animal tracks, right? They saw the bird print, the marks that I made or something like that. And that symbol then got to stand for the bird and eventually becomes more abstract. And same, you could sort of see the same thing with hieroglyphics, right? In a way. So why did we, now eventually we do see the usefulness of it. And that is the reason that we perpetuate it, which is why we're doing it now. And that's why the IQ of people is rising. And my son is smarter than I was, IQ wise can solve more problems. He's in first grade. I didn't even learn how to write until I was in first grade. That's when I learned the alphabet. I didn't go to preschool. They didn't have that. They didn't have that back then. Only rich people could send their kids away. Anyway, no one cares. But when I came home from the hospital, my mom put me in the drawer of our, what is it called? Chest of drawers, because we didn't have a crib. Anyway, we were poor, is what I'm saying. So that's that. Anyway, no one cares. The point, though, is that I think now we are doing it consciously, self-selecting. But it doesn't, just because we're doing it now doesn't mean that's how it originated. I think it originated because it was useful. Anyway, so that's what I would say about that. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Yeah, so evolution doesn't select for truth, it selects for survival, but it might coincide, exactly. Okay. I'm not sure what, I see this discussion happening here. I'm not sure if I'm following. Okay, sorry about, I'll really look at the argument supposed to refute a strong AI, which would include varying sensors, yet the argument. Yeah, no, I agree. I already said, Adam, that I don't think it refutes anything. I think what it does is illuminate your own, your own position. So it's useful in the know thyself way, but it's not useful in the refuting the other stuff way. So I agree with that. Causal closure, so Eigenvector says, could be an empirical hypothesis that has to be verified step by step. Yep. So right, and therefore cannot be used as a guide to the analysis of each case or of each causal explanation. Of course, on the contrary, it will result as being justified only if it's confirmed by facts. Yeah, it has been. From this perspective, however, the causal closure thesis cannot be considered as a principle. No one said it's a principle. I said it's an empirical claim. And it'd be unfair to use it as evidence against explanation. Okay, no, it's not unfair. So, okay. We have lots of reasons. There's a really, I would recommend David if you haven't seen the Consciousness Live discussion with David Papineau, the first one I did with him, you should check that out. And his paper, The Rise of Physicalism. But anyway, so I do think it's an empirical hypothesis, causal closure. And we don't know if it's true. It's an empirical hypothesis. And that the brain is a causally closed system is not known. I agree. But we don't have any reason to think it isn't, is the point, right? So that's when we are looking for what causes what in the brain, we look all over the place and we never find any reason to think that there's some violation of the causal closure principle. And yet the dualism straightforwardly predicts that of a certain kind, right? Dualisms of a certain kind predict that. And yet it hasn't been found in over 100 years of looking at what the brain is doing. Now, that doesn't mean it won't be found, but that's not nothing. That's evidence. And it is a premise that can serve as a premise in an argument. Careful study of the brain's causal mechanism has revealed only physical causes. In fact, neuroscientists are fairly confident that we could extrapolate all the way out to a full explanation of the animal's behavior in terms of the physical causes of the nervous system. And in simple organisms, that seems to be borne out. Not obviously 100%. We can't even simulate C. elegans. Obviously, we're extrapolating. But is that an unreasonable? You're saying that's an unreasonable attitude that the neuroscientist has? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. It's a very reasonable attitude, given the evidence which has been accumulated in the neurosciences, which is that every physical event in the brain has a cause explainable in terms of physical things in the brain or in the physical environment. And as of now, no behavior in any way, shape, or form, not even the reportings of icy reds and so forth, suggest some non-physical cause. So I'm not sure why you think it's unfair to use that fact that we have discovered about the functioning of the brain as evidence. It is evidence, and it seems to me to not prove that physicalism is true, or no, of course not, but certainly refutes the simple idea that there's some kind of mind stuff interacting with the brain constantly. Because if it were, we would have expect to found it by now. So maybe we'll find it later. It's certainly possible that there's a kind of energy source or something that we don't know about. And the classic example is electricity. The brain generates its own endogenous electrical signal, and we had no idea about that for thousands of years. And we had no idea of detecting it or measuring it or hypothesizing about it. And then we discovered electricity out there, and we're like, holy crap, it's also in here. So there could be something like that as well. Who knows? But as of right now, it is not unreasonable to use this as a premise in an argument. All right, so one cannot derive semantic from syntax. By definition, it would just be a bunch of, well, I'm not sure about that, but anyway, so that's, yeah, maybe. Okay, so I see, let's see if there's anything down here further. What I meant, regular people call it manifestation, but I was expecting a more substantially scientific approach to this effect. All right, Veronica, I'm not sure why you would expect that. So there are plenty of debunking hypotheses, that I could give you about why you mistakenly believe in that sort of manifestation, but they probably won't convince you. I don't know, whatever. But so, here's an example that comes from my own personal life. I remember when I was a child, preteen, my mom is an artist, and she painted a lot. And she's a great artist, by the way. I suck at art, but she was really good. And so she painted this picture of a guy in a hat with a beard. And she quite liked it. It was in like a painting, right? A portrait. She thought she made it up. And then, I don't know how long later, a week, a month, something, she met this guy. And they started dating. And the guy looked very much similar to the painting, the guy that she had painted in the painting. And she, my mom, inferred from that. She's very superstitious, very religious. She inferred from that she had somehow dreamt or foreseen this meeting of this guy. That's what she told me. And I was like, yeah, come on, man. I was very skeptical about that. And I didn't really know how to do anything with it at the time. I just thought there's got to be a better explanation. So I think here's an explanation. Who knows if it's the right one, but here's an explanation. So we know so you wanted more science. So I'll give you some science. So we know from our investigations, these things called change blindness and something called subliminal perception. So subliminal perception occurs when something is presented to you, but you deny seeing it. And yet we can show it has some effect psychologically. So, just a simple example, I do this in my class all the time. I can show a picture of a rabbit. So I just show this picture. And I don't say anything about it, just on my PowerPoint slides. And then I say the word hair and I ask for the definition. A lot of people say, oh, it's a kind of animal, as opposed to the thing on your head. So the sound hair that we make is ambiguous, as between hair as in rabbit and hair as in stuff on mammals. So they were primed in a sense, right? Now they were primed to say for one definition because I put the picture up. Now that's a case where they were consciously seeing it. So you can do that in a case where they deny that they saw the rabbit, but they still have that priming effect. So that's called the unconscious priming. And this happens all the time, right? So perhaps my mom was at the grocery store and that guy who she was later going to meet was there too. Maybe he was shopping and maybe she walked by him and saw him. Maybe he was picking some pasta off a shelf and she saw him out of the corner of her eye when she was reading a label. I'm making all this up. I don't know. Could happen though. Equally plausible. So she made up that. I dreamt it, right? So this is a made up thing too. So now we know from the scientific results on priming that things that you're not consciously paying attention to can get in, be processed, and show up later. Okay, so therefore, what? Well, she saw the guy, she processed his face. Maybe then she went home and dreamt about him, because we typically dream about things which happen to us during the course of our day. So then she forgets about the dream because we don't remember most of our dreams. So then she paints this painting from memory of this guy she saw in a dream, but doesn't remember seeing in a dream. But she saw him in the dream because she unconsciously, not awarely, saw him at the bus stop, in the store, whatever. So then she meets him a week later. Is that a surprise? No, he clearly is around. That's why she maybe passed him. So now that's an explanation, which I find very satisfying, instead of this other explanation in terms of seeing the future, manifesting something. It's based on things that we know and understand, like change blindness, you're not being aware of things that you're right in front of your face, that you could not be aware of something and yet it could affect you, and so forth and so on. So, there's two explanations. Which one is the more plausible one? Is people will disagree on that. So I don't know if that's the sort of thing you were talking about, Veronica, when you said that you were looking for a more substantially scientific approach. It's going to be a debunking explanation. It's not going to be it's not going to be a justifying explanation, in my opinion. Although, who knows? Because, as I mentioned just a second ago, the world is stranger than we think it is. Science has shown us that. And so I don't think it takes any stretch of the imagination to think that some of these things that we think of as parapsychological may have some basis in physical reality that we just don't know about. When I was younger, I speculated about astrology because I found out that I was a certain sign. And then I read about that sign. I was like, it sort of describes me. But then it also said, you'll be friends with these guys and not those guys. And I was like, whoa, most of my friends are these guys and not those guys. And actually that guy I really don't like is one of these. And so I was like, that's suspicious. So then I started thinking, well, how could this be physically explained? Well, I don't know. So neurochemistry depends on these, the brain sits in this kind of liquid. And so maybe, the moon has some effect on its gravitational effect has effect on liquids like the tides. So maybe the moon being in a certain position affects the neurochemistry. I mean, that's super made up, but at least it's not impossible that there's some physical thing that we don't understand that explains these things. So I agree. You should have an open mind, but I don't think that the correct interpretation is something supernatural happened. So yes, people have experiences, but anecdotes are not evidence. And, anyway, so I agree. Yeah, I can't validate it, but I'm skeptical. But there are scientists that study this. So I want evidence. Look, I have an open mind about lots of stuff, but I want evidence. And the kind of evidence I take, the most seriously is empirical evidence. But that's just me. So I don't think that we really have any empirical evidence which suggests that the sorts of things you're talking about are true. Like truly supernatural stuff, in other words. But anyway, so who knows? Who knows? No, so Adam, no reason to think there is mind out there. Look at the trees. 1-1 trees. I do look at the trees. Okay, so actually this is this part of what this thing I'm working on right now. So I talked to Monica Gagliano, Gagliano, as I would say in English, but she's, I think, in this group of people who are arguing that plants are more sophisticated than we think that they are, and I agree. Of course, that's what you would, predict if evolution were true. There's a continuity between every living thing on this planet if we all come from a single common ancestor. It's no surprise that plants do stuff, but there's no reason to think that they are conscious, since the sorts of things that they do are the sorts of things that we do unconsciously. I had that discussion with Evan Thompson on this recently on my Consciousness Live podcast. Not to say that I won that discussion or anything. No, it wasn't a debate. We were just having a conversation, but I wasn't convinced that there's reasons to think that biopsychism is true. I like what I call neuropsychism, which is the idea that you need neurons, brains. Okay, Adam says, thank you for your attention to people in the chat. Oh, that's why I came here. So you're welcome. Yeah. I've never done one of these live things, but I wanted to come and talk to you guys. So that's, I appreciate you appreciating it. Thank you. Okay, so peacefully happy. What are your thoughts on anti-natalism? Interesting. I take anti-natalism seriously. In fact, I tried to get an anti-natalist on my show, Pat Benatar. Is that his name? Pat? No, am I thinking of the musician? David Benatar. Oh my God. That's embarrassing. Holy smokes. I do like Pat Benatar though. The older I get, the more I fucking appreciate Pat Benatar. She rocks, dude. Anyway, David Benatar, I think is his name. He said no, and that's cool. Lots of people say no, but I pretty much ask everybody to come and talk to me. Pat Benatar. Anti-natalism. So as I interpret anti-natalism, in fact, it's funny, in my old days, I listened to some death metal and played death metal too. And I put up a death metal song on my YouTube channel, and when somebody commented, "Oh, now I know why I'm an anti-natalist," I was like, "Dude, fuck you, dude." Anyway, okay, so that's neither here nor there. So anti-natalism is not the view that you should not care about people who are born, but it's the view, as I understand it, that it's better not to be born, that it's always morally wrong to have children, in other words, or and that the general idea is that overall, on balance, there's more suffering in any given life than there is positive, right? So there's always some good stuff, but more bad stuff, I guess, is that, like, just general stuff. Like, I was hungry yesterday. I couldn't eat for an hour, but then also, like, I fell and hurt myself. And also, I was assaulted and personally had issues, beat up as a kid, etc. Okay. So lots of stuff. All of that stuff, you add it up, I guess the argument is that overall it's always worse. So that's, those are considerations for not having kids. So I take that seriously. And in fact, I never thought that I wanted to have children, mostly for those kinds of reasons. I didn't know about anti-natalism, but I was just generally like, it's a harm to be born, because you show up here and then, like, you find out you're going to die. I mean, when I was young, I never knew that death was a thing or that death was possible. Consciousness doesn't suggest death. That's a kind of thing that the phenomenologists like to say. I think it's true, though. Just, it's just a flow of things after the next. It's sort of like the natural numbers. You would expect they just go on. So why wouldn't my conscious experience just go on? That's sort of, it seems like a similar, just a succession of things. But then you find out, whoa, there's an end, or maybe there's an end. So, yeah. Obviously, I'm not convinced by anti-natalism since I have children, but it took me a long time to have them. I'm 50 years old and my son is 6. And I don't have any other kids that I know of. No, seriously, I don't. So I do take it seriously, and I do think that it's a serious question. I guess I was sort of persuaded by the idea that there's people here already and that the situation's pretty bad and that we need people with different ideas, and we can help by, we have some effect by, anyway. So I think, yeah, but I'm not 100% convinced. I don't regret having my children, but I'm already like thinking about them, finding about it, like about death and like how the world really works. And, they don't know about factory farming or terrorism or the environment. So anyway, yeah, anti-natalism, dude. Obviously, I remember one time when my wife and I were at my wife's parents' house, their in-laws, and they were talking about having kids. And I was like, I don't think I want to have kids. And they were like, oh, shut up. Don't be stupid. Of course you do. And I was like, no, I don't, and sort of topic of anti-natalism came up. And they just thought it was idiotic. Like, they're just regular persons. They don't care. They're, like, that's fucking stupid. And I don't think it's stupid, actually. I think it's serious. But the biological drive to have children is very strong. And there's something deeply satisfying about it. And that's, of course, our biology. So that doesn't mean it's morally right, obviously. But anyway, so yes, I think it's a serious question, but let me be clear. Once you are here, then you matter morally, and there's no question in my mind. I'm not like, don't think that like the balance of suffering means we should go around shooting people or killing people. Nope. Anti-natalism is simply the question of whether it's moral to have children. It's interesting because if you take it into a religious context, it's like, yeah, if we're asking this question, how can a perfect creator not be asking whether it's moral to create? Anyway, okay, so I agree. It's a tough and vexed question. So what is my general approach about philosophy of science? Carlos asks. Yeah. I guess, yeah, that's a good question. I started off as a like hardcore scientific realist. And I guess I don't know. I still sort of am. Like, I think strings really exist. Maybe. So I guess I am sort of a realist, but I also like could I be an instrumentalist? I don't know. But there's some sort of epistemic interpretations of quantum mechanics that I could be, that I take seriously. But my general sympathies are with scientific realism. Okay, let's see here. I kind of lost when something happened. I lost my track of where I was over here. Yeah, I don't know. The message is scrolled and now I'm back at the beginning somehow. I'm not sure what happened. So I am also noticing that it's been like 2 hours. It's almost 7. And I probably should go and do some other things, but I don't know if this was fun. So maybe I'll do another one of these if this was something that people would come back and talk to me more. I'm interested in these questions, and I think that they're hard. So I appreciate people like you guys putting in the time and effort to think about it. And I'm, like I say, very skeptical, generally agnostic. Should I be? I don't know. Convince me I shouldn't. So thanks guys for coming and hanging out with me. I really enjoyed this. Let me know if you think I should do another one. I see just now something popped up about the Vedas. Let's talk about that later, because yeah, I do appreciate them. And there's a lot I could say about that. Anyway, so I appreciate your time, guys. I appreciate you coming at this early hour. I figured, you know what? If I'm going to do one of these, I'm going to do it at a time when I'm up and when I'm thinking, and that's when I have my coffee. So thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I appreciate it. And if you guys want to do another one, and I'd be happy to talk with you again. Thanks again. I appreciate it. All right, guys, take it easy.